Welcome back to another edition of Force Friday, where we talk about Star Wars theories, characters, concepts, comparisons, analyzations, collectibles, and more. And today we're going to kind of follow up to last week's video and cover the Lucas sequel trilogy with recent developments in regards to how he saw episode 9 of his trilogy ending, etc., and then comparing it against the Trevorrow, and we'll just kind of keep it moving. Originally, George Lucas planned the original trilogy as a 6-part story with 3 prequels showing the rise of Darth Vader and a young Obi-Wan. Following the release of Empire Strikes Back in 1980, Lucas's marriage to his wife Marcia became strained. Deflated and wishing to spend more time with his daughter, the then upcoming 3rd film was changed to be a climax, making the series a trilogy. Interestingly, Lucas's sour mood at the time and Steven Spielberg's own divorce are held by both men as the reason Temple of Doom was so dark and awesome. During production of the prequels, Lucas began to maintain that episode 6 was the final part of the saga and that no episode 7 would ever be made. But like a wise man once told me, you should try to refrain from saying always and never. Lucas began seriously considering a future trilogy around 2010 and began working on it seriously sometime around 2011. He has since maintained in interviews that this was intended to be the final chapter of his saga, with his prior statements on the subject being attributed to widespread prequel backlash. It became known sometime prior to Force Awakens release that Lucas was no longer involved, despite him being announced as Lucasfilm's creative consultant going forward. At the time, this was widely seen as a positive decision. Lucas aired his thoughts on The Force Awakens in a Charlie Rose interview some months prior to release. He said positive things about Kennedy and Abrams, who he called a friend and a talented director, but seemed fairly negative on the film, calling it a retro movie. I don't like that. Bob Iger's 2019 book confirmed long-standing fan assumptions about Lucas's feelings regarding The Force Awakens. Iger said he didn't hide his disappointment, saying there was nothing new and not wanting to attend the premiere. His thoughts on The Last Jedi are unknown, although a spokesperson for him said it was beautifully made, and no statement was released for The Rise of Skywalker. Word on the street was that he greatly enjoyed Rogue One and Solo. A long-standing rumor was that George's 7, 8, and 9 either adapted or borrowed from Timothy Zahn's trilogy, some of the first big EU novels and effectively the next trilogy in book form. This was never the case. Never an option, never part of his considerations. Lucas had a healthy attitude to the EU and often borrowed from it, but Lucasfilm Limited alumni Dave Filoni and J.W. Rinsler have said he never truly regarded it as canon to the films. So, what do we know about what he had planned? Lucas's 7, 8, and 9 existed in plot treatment form. No scripts are known to have been written. The trilogy would have featured the return of Han, Luke, and Leia. Whether Han would have died in 7 is unknown, although considering Harrison Ford's attitude to Star Wars and a possible return, it seems pretty likely. Luke Skywalker did die in episode 8, and Leia was the central returning character. I had planned for the first trilogy to be about the father, the second to be about the son, and the third to be about the daughter and the grandchildren. He stated, the central character would have still been a young teenage girl who becomes a Jedi. She had various names, including Taryn, Winky, and Thea, but by the time Lucas left was called Kira. Kira became Rey, who was likely related in some way to Han, Leia, or Luke. The first film involved Kira searching for Luke Skywalker, who was disillusioned and in hiding, described by Lucas as a Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. The key difference between Lucas's version and Rian Johnson's was that Luke seemed to be searching for the mystery of the Whills and their role in the universe. The other main character was a young teenage boy at one point called Sam. Virtually nothing is known about him, other than his personality being described by Lucas as pure charisma. It starts out a few years after Return of the Jedi, and we establish pretty quickly that there's this underworld, there are these offshoot stormtroopers who started their own planets, and that Luke is trying to restart the Jedi. He puts the word out, so out of 100,000 Jedi, maybe 50 or 100 are left. The Jedi have to grow again from scratch, so Luke has to find 2- and 3-year-olds and train them. It'll be 20 years before you have a new generation of Jedi. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody, now what are you going to do, said Lucas. Rebuilding afterwards is harder than starting a rebellion or fighting the war. When you win the war and you disband the opposing army, what do? The stormtroopers would be like Saddam Hussein's fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting. The stormtroopers refused to give up when the Republic won. One of the key mysteries of the trilogy was the Whills, who we learn are a microbiotic life form who live symbiotically with the midichlorians. The Whills are not the Force, which is still exactly as it was presented in the original trilogy, but they are a life form who guide and shape the actions of those who listen to it. it. The other mystery was that of the chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. A key question of the prequels was how destroying the Sith brings balance. And if dark is a natural part of the Force, what's to stop someone else simply using it? It seems this was Lucas's intention. He says that Leia was to be revealed as the true chosen one, not because she destroys anyone, but because by the trilogy's end, she becomes Supreme Chancellor, bringing about lasting peace and finally creating a just society for the galaxy. In this way, the chosen one prophecy is retroactively made a symptom of the prequel Jedi's hubris, who saw a prophecy about balance as being all about them. Darth Maul would have served as a key overarching villain in the trilogy, with Lucas asking Dave Filoni to resurrect the character in 2010 for the Clone Wars for this reason. There's a power vacuum, so gangsters like the Hutts are taking advantage of the situation and there is chaos, said Lucas. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected in the Clone Wars cartoons. He brings all the gangs together. He's very old, and we have two versions of him. One is with a set of cybernetic legs like a spider, and later on he has metal legs, and he was a little bit bigger, more of a superhero. Despite this, Maul was not the main villain facing Kira. That was supposedly Darth Talon, Maul's trained apprentice, who Lucas describes as the trilogy's Vader-like recurring villain. Talon was created for the Legacy comic series set 100 years after Return of the Jedi. Lucas always liked the character and was going to adapt her here, or at least he says now in 2020. So, looking at all three, Trevorrow's, Lucas's, and what Abrams ended up doing to close 9, I guess, honestly, I like Lucas's the best, but Lucas's is also the most vague and least fleshed out, right? So it kind of has the privilege and advantage of not being scrutinized. I love George Lucas. He's my favorite lovable lunatic, but I take a lot of what he says with a grain of salt. He was never going to make a prequel trilogy. He made a prequel trilogy. He was never going to make a sequel trilogy. Now he had plans to make a sequel trilogy. He wanted to kill Darth Maul. He wanted to bring him back. Oftentimes he disregarded the EU. Now Talon's one of his favorite characters. Like, it's just, there's a lot of inconsistencies with the guy. And I say that respectfully and from a loving place. But what I think George Lucas understands about Star Wars better than anybody, and not because he created it, just because of where he's coming from creatively with it, is that the Skywalker saga is about family. And the family lineage coursing through his trilogy, which would run through all three, to me, at least on paper and certainly from a distance, sounds far better than what we eventually got. And I say that not hating what we got, but I think whereas the sequel trilogy we got, bookend-wise anyway, meaning 7 and 9, was something of an attempt to restore vitality to the original trilogy that was in perfectly good shape before the sequel trilogy ever came along. It sounds like George Lucas did want to move forward while maintaining that bloodline and what that bloodline means to the galaxy, to each other, and to the Force itself. I'm not sure how I feel about Leia being the chosen one, but I don't hate it. And a lot of it would have had to do with how it was executed. What does trouble me and has bothered me since the very first time I heard wind of it is his plans in regards to the wills. It just sounds like more science in my magic and is something I don't care for in Star Wars. I prefer the fantasy element far more than the science fiction element. The other thing I find myself making the Futurama meme face at is his wanting to bring back Darth Maul and have him be a key role in these films, simultaneously making him connected to the gang situation, which I'll be honest with you, I don't think was ever a part of Lucas's plan until he saw Solo, which he did say he enjoyed. And while he's involved in this gangland life, also taking on a Sith apprentice in Darth Talon, it just doesn't sound like he knew what to do with the villains. And I'll be fair and honest about my critique of where Star Wars has gone. I'm not sure anyone has had a clearly defined plan or view or interesting idea in regard to what to do with the villains. Vanquishing the Sith, theoretically, in Episode 6 is the gift and the curse. It ties up that trilogy beautifully and adds some gravitas to a slightly disappointing film, but at the same time puts future creators in a really tough spot as to where to go in regard to the conflict. It sounds like Lucas had a clear idea of how to handle the politics and the war and knew that family was the key, but didn't exactly know how to accomplish establishing a villain, creating the conflict there, and making it seem like a worthwhile objective to overcome. But either way, interesting stuff to know. A lot of people have asked about my opinions on the 3 different options regarding the sequels, and now I've got it covered. Rest in peace, David Prowse. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.